Hello and welcome to the Run Testers. My name's Nick and this is our long-term review of the Garmin Epix Pro. So I've been wearing the Garmin Epix Pro for most of the last 12 months since it was launched in May 2023. During that time I've compared it to lots of other watches and I've worn it for long training blocks. So I wanted to do this long-term review of the watch and see how it stands in today's market. So looking at some of the design stats, the Garmin Epix Pro comes in three sizes, 42mm, 47mm, and this, the 51mm watch, has an AMOLED touchscreen that comes in three sizes from 1.2 inches up to 1.4 in the largest watch. You can get a steel or a titanium model of the watch. The steel ones are the cheaper models. They have Corning Gorilla Glass screens, whereas the more expensive titanium models have sapphire crystal screens. It's the bezel and the back of the case that you get in those metal materials with a plastic in between. You can get various straps from the watch from Garmin directly. The silicone one comes as standard. I'm going to say this is a nylon band that I got off eBay. We've had a lot of questions about this band in the past, so I will pop a link in the description below. It's a very cheap band. It has a loop on one end that you can't actually get onto the bar of the Epix, which is fixed in place, but if you just shove it through like that, it works perfectly fine. Anyway, I will put a link to that in the description. It just costs a few pounds off eBay. All of the Epix Pro watches have Garmin's classic 5-button design and a built-in flashlight, which I'll just show you briefly there. Hopefully that's not too dazzling in these bright conditions. They all also have Garmin's latest Elevate heart rate sensor, and they can take an ECG measurement, although this is a feature that's only available in the US at the moment. You've got multi-band GPS on all of the watches in the range. They are 1080M waterproof rated. You can connect to external sensors via Bluetooth and ANT+, and they have all the sensors you'd expect from a top Garmin on board, like an altimeter, compass, and a pulse oximeter. So as I said at the top, I've been using the Epix Pro for most of the last year. I initially tested the 47mm version of the watch, which is the kind of standard middle size, and then for most of the year I have been testing the 51mm version, which has much longer battery life as the main plus, which I'll come on to in a bit. I used the watch for the entirety of my London Marathon training block this year, and I also used the watch for a 50-mile 80k ultramarathon last year, and for various other little training blocks throughout the last year. So running through the key areas of what's come up for me over the past year with the watch, the design I think is really nice. It's obviously a pretty big watch, but it's not noticeably bigger or less comfortable than all these kind of top watches in this bracket, like the Polar Grit X or the Coros Vertix or things like the Garmin Enduro and Fenix. Like, you can get a lighter, slimmer watch if you look at the Forerunner 965 from Garmin, but even the 51mm Epix Pro, which is very big on my skinny wrist, has felt comfortable. I've been able to sleep with it. It's never felt too annoying to have such a large watch on my wrist. Touchscreen is great. It's really responsive. It's very snappy to use, and the buttons also obviously are very useful when you're on the run and it's cold or wet and you don't want to be using a touchscreen to do any kind of activity with the watch. You can always just do everything with the buttons, which is probably how I mostly navigate around the watch in general. I often have to turn the touchscreen off actually because my baby plays with it and is incredibly adept at removing the widgets from my watch. I don't know how he does it because he can't speak or think really so far, but he is very good at deleting and rearranging widgets on this watch. The flashlight is the big design feature on the watch compared to the Epix 2, and it is very handy. I'd say, like, even for me, someone who's at home most of the time, I don't go on any big adventures. I use it to get around the house at night and see to children, and if you are someone who's outside a lot after dark, it's just very nifty to have a watch on your wrist. Like last weekend I was at a wedding and there was a chance we might have to walk a couple of miles in the dark back to our accommodation, and I had a torch on my wrist. Very handy indeed. Not necessarily a reason that I'd upgrade, but I think it's something that if you are outdoors a lot will be of great benefit. AMOLED display is obviously the big feature that separates it from other top Garmins like the Fenix and the Enduro. I really like this display. It's very bright and easy to read. It's brighter than the classic LCD screens if you're indoors or under tree cover or dappled light or under cloud cover, and in sunlight it's still really clear to read. So yeah, even when you are in bright sunny conditions, I still find the AMOLED screen as good as an LCD screen, and it's better than it in most conditions. When it comes to sports tracking and the training analysis, these are as comprehensive and excellent as you'd expect from a top Garmin. It's as good as anything else on the market. During sports, you can show pretty much any data screens you watch. You've got loads of customization options on the watch. You can show up to 8 stats at once, all the different sports modes you could want, including a track mode for running. And yeah, actually in-activity experience is very easy. And things like the structured workout builder, whether you're doing a complicated workout you set up via Garmin Connect or a simple one you do on the watch itself, it's all very intuitive, easy to use, and just works. It fits very well for the kind of runner I am anyway. I've always found that anything I want to do in terms of sports tracking, the Garmin Epix Pro can do it. Training analysis is also incredibly comprehensive, like more comprehensive than probably anyone really needs, but all the stats are there, and it has stats that you just don't really find on other watches. There's some interesting new ones that have come to it, like hill score and endurance score, and if you go to your max estimate, you get race predictions, you get the usual training load analysis, which is done pretty well on the watch. It's all shown very clearly on the watch itself through widgets that are color coded, and yeah, really it's up to the runner individually how much you use this kind of stuff, but it is all there on Garmin. That's very much a key thing with top Garmins, is all the features are there if you want them, and they're quite easy to ignore if you don't want them. So different times throughout the year, I've been more into some of these stats. When I was training for an ultramarathon last year, that was going to have a reasonable amount of elevation, not too much. I didn't pick a very hilly ultra. I did get quite into the hill score. If I was doing more hilly runs, I'd see that rise over time. My 4-week training load would have more elevation. And then during the London Marathon block earlier this year, I could see my endurance score going up as I ramped up my mileage, ramped up the intensity of my long sessions. And it was pleasing just to see that represented in graph form on the watch. And although the race predictor is not very accurate for me, I've always found that with Garmin. The VO2 max prediction actually is pretty good over time. Like during the time I've had this watch and tested other Garmins, I've had a proper test done with a gas exchange mask and all that, and the VO2 max estimate on the Garmin has tallied up pretty well with that. So just getting loads of information here, and it's presented very nicely, and if you're into it, you've got it there. It's also the training readiness stat, which is useful, I think. Like, there are definitely problems with it, undermining its accuracy in terms of the sleep tracking on the Garmin, which I'll come on to later, but you can look at that stat, and as a trend over time, it is quite useful each day to get that kind of HRV reading, the training readiness, and stuff like that you can use to judge your overall state each day, even if you are mostly going to go on feel, which is what I do anyway. It's just nice to have it on the watch, and yeah, like I say, it's all there if you want it. GPS accuracy on the Epix Pro, I've tested this against pretty much all the best multi-band watches out there, and I'd say Garmin's GPS accuracy in multi-band mode is as good or better than pretty much anything else on the market. I think the only watches that I think have matched the Garmin for accuracy are probably things like the Suunto Race and Suunto Vertical. The new Coros Vertix 2S is also very good. Polar Gritex is a little bit less accurate. I find the Apple Watch Ultra is close to as good as well, but basically throughout my testing, I've never really had a major problem with the GPS. Like, it is still not going to be infallible. When I've done like big city events like the London Marathon or London Landmarks Half Marathon, when you're under tall skyscrapers, you are going to see some inaccurate GPS. There's no watch that has performed well for me in those conditions yet. It's very good under tree cover, and it's very reliable when it comes to pacing. It doesn't jump around a lot. It doesn't seem to have just big errors. Like all the other watches I've tested, like maybe once or twice, they might just throw up something where they just went completely wrong. They said they had GPS lock on and they didn't, or something like that. And in a year of use with the Epix Pro, just had nothing like that. Like, it will go wrong, like I say, in certain conditions under very tall buildings and all that, but for the most part, it's very steady, it's very solid, it's very reliable, which is indicative of Garmin as a platform in general. Everything is really polished and has been done for a long time, so they've kind of ironed out the kinks, whereas with some other brands, you are still having a few more kinks and bugs. Heart rate accuracy. So you've got the latest Garmin sensor on the Epix Pro, and it is pretty good for an optical heart rate sensor. Like, you could rely on it for the most part. It's had some real blinders for me. Like, I didn't wear a chest or an arm strap during the London Marathon, and the Epix Pro did read my heart rate correctly, to my knowledge, during that run. Like, it looked exactly what I'd expect it to be, basically. Having used a chest strap for most of the training, the heart rate in the race was tracked very accurately by the watch. I still wouldn't rely on it. I haven't relied on it for most of the 12 months. I've connected either an armband heart rate monitor or a chest strap to the watch, because basically it only takes one or two bad runs to really throw out a lot of the long-term training analysis on the watch. Because if it just reads way too high, for example, if it locks onto your cadence for a run, which it does do sometimes, and then it's very, very high, your heart rate for the whole run, suddenly you've got all these intensities things being thrown at you in your training analysis, saying you're training too hard and all that, and your heart rate is very high for a slower pace than usual and all that. So yeah, I'd still link up an armband or a chest strap if you don't want to. I think this is one of the better optical heart rate trackers on the market, but I just don't think any of them are up to snuff for my use anyway. Battery life. So this obviously depends on the size of the watch. With the 47mm Epix Pro, it was in line with the Garmin Epix 2. It lasted me 4 or 5 days on a charge, and it was, it's pretty good. Like, that's quite nice for a big AMOLED watch like that that's doing a lot. But the 51mm Epix Pro is pretty special on battery life. It's the best AMOLED watch for battery life I've come across. It's lasted 9 or 10 days on a charge, like 10 days for normal use, and in the depth of marathon training when I was probably doing about 125 kilometers a week and using it for notifications, always in multi-band mode and that kind of thing, it might drop down towards 9 days, but that's still very good. It is a big watch to wear, but you are getting a huge leap in battery life compared to the smaller models of the Epix and indeed most other AMOLED watches out there. So yeah, that's the big takeaway with the Epix Pro 51mm is the extra battery life you get is like double what you get from the next size down. Price is a lot higher for the bigger watch, but you're getting a big payoff there with that battery life. So throughout the testing of this watch, I have had it at a high intensity of battery use. I've pretty much had the screen always on the entire time, and I've had multi-band on, I've had notifications coming in, it's been vibrating for certain things, and yeah, like I say, it's nearly was 9-10 days of use. In terms of single activity use, 50 mile, 80 kilometer ultra marathon I did with it took me 8 hours, just pretty much on the dot, and the battery life went from 97% down to 79%. Again, that was in multi-band mode, so that's a drop of 18% for 8 hours of use, which actually is better than Garmin's estimate on battery life. But in general, I say you can look at those estimates and know you are going to hit them. If you add in things like playing music on the watch, which I didn't really do, that will bring the battery life down quite considerably. But the big takeaway is like the 51mm watch has the best battery life I've come across on an AMOLED watch, and the smaller models are still okay. You're still looking at a few days, 4 or 5 days with the 47mm watch. Comes to maps and navigation, the Epix Pro, like all of Garmin's top watches with this feature, is very very, very good and well ahead of the competition from other brands. You've got these really clear, detailed maps on the watch that are very easy to see on the AMOLED screen, especially if you're navigating in forest and stuff like that. When you're under tree cover, the AMOLED screen really comes into its own then. These are routable maps, so you can use them to create routes on the fly. If you're following a route and you go wrong, the watch will adjust the route so you can find your way back the trail. You can use it to create a route home if you're going back to start point, things like that. The maps are fantastic on Garmin watches. It's no different with the Epix Pro, except that you've got the AMOLED screen, which makes them, I think, easier to read and clearer than you have when you're looking at maps on the Fenix or the Enduro watches. We've also got Climb Pro on the watch, which is a fantastic feature and one that helps Garmin's navigation features stand out from other brands. This breaks out all the climbs and descents in your route so you can see them one by one, and you can look at the screen when you're on a climb and you'll see how much of the climb you have left, how much elevation you've got to cover, and how long in distance as well. And it just means you can judge efforts on uphills in particular. It's really helpful, I find. So yeah, great feature. Maps navigation on the Epix Pro, top notch, in line with what you get from other Garmins though. It's not like you're getting anything extra here, aside from the AMOLED screen, which obviously the only other Garmin AMOLED watches with maps are the Epix 2 and the Forerunner 965. When it comes to smart features, the Epix Pro is not a full smartwatch like the Apple Watch, but it is very good for a sports watch. I say of all sports watch brands, Garmin has the most useful smart features, starting with music, where you have the capability to link up with streaming services, Spotify, Amazon Music and Deezer if you have premium accounts on those, and you can wirelessly transfer your playlist to the watch. You can also just control music playback on your phone using the watch. It's got NFC payments through Garmin Pay, which is not so good in the UK. It doesn't have that many high street banks supported. There are workarounds of apps and that, but it does have those. If you're going to if you really want to use NFC payments on this watch, you can do it. There are ways to do it, which isn't the case with most sports watches. You've got a limited app store in terms of Connect IQ. It's mostly watch faces and the occasional data field, but you can get your parkrun barcode on the watch, which is the app I download on every single Garmin I use, and that is very handy. So yeah, for a sports watch, it is pretty smart, and it looks good. Obviously, the screen looks the part of a smartwatch. You get good weather forecast, notifications, and all that coming in, but you haven't got the full app store or something like the Apple Watch or a Google Play smartwatch, and you don't get other features you get with the Apple Watch, like the ability to store tickets for planes and trains and other cards like supermarket loyalty cards. It's not quite as smart as something like the Apple Watch Ultra, but for a sports watch, the smart features I think are pretty good, and we'll cover off the key ones that people might need. The activity tracking is pretty solid on this watch. You get step counts, which you can set to adjust in line with your activity if you want some truly insane step targets when you're deep in marathon training, which is what I often get. Don't like calorie counts on Garmin's. I think the base calorie count is set too low on the watch, like the amount that they say you're burning just through without any activity at all, which means I think the overall calorie count is low. And when I am deep in something like marathon training and I get a bit worried about losing weight, I look at those calorie counts, and for me they do seem low, and they are low, and I'm probably not judging anything by those calorie counts. Just something I've noticed over the course of the year. I feel like they are a little bit low. Step count seems fine though, and it seems to do a good job of recognizing steps even when you're pushing a buggy. And then you get obviously the readiness and the heart rate variability stuff on the watch. Like, debate about this, about whether it's accurate, how much people want to use it, but I think if you use a watch for a long time, you can use things like the heart rate variability status, can get your heart rate variability reading in the morning and just look at the single number, and you can use Garmin's trading readiness as long as you're aware that there are going to be some problems of accuracy around some things, like if you haven't used a heart rate monitor for your training, or the sleep tracking, which, as with all Garmin's, tends to overestimate how much time you spend asleep, because a lot of the time when you're just stationary in bed after a certain time at night, or if you're stationary in your front room watching TV, you'll get logged as light sleep, and the watch did miss a lot of times. I got woken up in the night by my baby and things like that. So I'll take the sleep tracking with a pinch of salt. I probably wouldn't use the sleep coach on the watch as a result of that, but tends to err on the positives, but I do think it's a little bit less accurate than the sleep tracking on other watches, and it does obviously feed into some stats like your training readiness, so I'd keep an eye on that. One other thing I do like about the general kind of activity tracking on the watch is that the recovery advisor you get after workouts will take into account like how busy you are throughout the rest of the day. So often I'll have quite a stationary day at home. If I'm working from home and I run and then I just sit at my desk the rest of the day and work there, I will get a little buzz saying your recovery time has come down because you've had a very stationary day. Whereas if it's a weekend day, my recovery won't be coming down like that because I'll be spending the day on my feet, doing activities with the family and stuff like that. So that takes a slightly more holistic view of that recovery advisor than you maybe get with some other sports watches. Right, it comes to the verdict. I would say if you don't mind the size and you don't mind the price, the Garmin Epix Pro 51mm model in particular is the best sports watch on the market. It's the one I chose to use over all the other ones I've tested for most of the past year, so I guess you could say that was a foregone conclusion that I'd say that, but it's a very expensive watch, but it does deliver in spades, and the main thing you get here compared to other AMOLED options is the really impressive battery life, as long as you, like I say, you don't mind having quite a big watch on your wrist. Pretty much all the features on this watch are as good or better than you get on watches from outside Garmin. GPS is excellent, the tracking's very good. You get the really impressive navigation features, and the smart features are good enough for me that they cover off what I need, even if it's not as good as something like an Apple Watch on that front. So if money is no object, I would go for it. It's the best watch I've tested. However, money usually is an object, and I'd certainly say you can get better value within Garmin's range, and there's certainly other competitors out there that are worth looking at. So I'm going to run through a load of watches now that I've also tested this year that you might be considering along with the Epix Pro and see how they stand. And the big one to start with, I think, is the Garmin Forerunner 965, because that is such a good watch. It is lighter and slimmer and a little bit more comfortable to wear than the Epix Pro as a result, and it's actually got the same size screen as the 51mm Epix Pro despite being a smaller watch. Also has pretty good battery life. It lasts more like 7 days on a charge, so it lasts longer than the 47mm Epix Pro, if not quite as long as the 51mm. Got that gorgeous AMOLED display and all of Garmin's top software features on that watch as well. Don't get the flashlight or the latest heart rate sensor, but I would say those are probably more nice than absolutely essential. So yeah, that is a fantastic watch. That's a fair bit cheaper. Only thing that really sticks in my mind about that watch is I used it a fair bit this last year. I used it for a 50k run, a trail run, and I scratched the screen. And I think Kieran's also scratched the screen from the run testers as well. I just would worry about that with the 965. You've got the hardier, more rugged model with the Epix in terms of both the case and the screen. And I think if you are someone who's going to be outdoors a lot and that kind of thing, there are several situations basically where I've had this watch on and I've banged it or dropped it or something like that, and I've gone, oh, if that was the Forerunner 965, I'm worried I might have damaged it a bit, but I haven't damaged the Epix Pro. So that's the one big caveat there. But in terms of actual features and usability, the 965 is a fantastic watch. It's probably the one I'd go for over the Epix Pro if you're considering price as well. And then I'd probably buy a screen protector as well, and then you'd be fine. There's also the Garmin Epix 2, which got pretty much all the features that came to the Garmin Epix Pro in terms of software added to it. So you are getting things like the hill score and endurance score, and you've got the bright AMOLED screen, you've got all the maps and everything like that. Again, you don't get the flashlight and the latest heart rate sensor, but still consider them probably more nice than essential features. And you have got that more rugged body than the Forerunner 965. Only thing to say is with the Garmin Epix 2, you need to look at a Sapphire model if you want to get the multi-band GPS. You don't get it on the standard steel models, but that is a really fantastic watch and often in sale. So not only is it cheaper on RRP than the latest Epix Pro, you can get the Epix 2 at a discount a lot of the time, and that is going to be better value. And the watch I'd go for, I would say, you won't be able to get a 51mm model though, so you won't get that big battery life bump. But like I say, the Garmin Epix 2 I use for a long time. We've got a long-term review of that watch up as well. I use that for kind of 4 or 5 days pretty easily on a charge, and it really does match up the Epix Pro and all the really important features. So yeah, they're the two watches I'd look at for value. If you want all these amazing features that Garmin are offering here, you can get for less on the Garmin Epix 2 and the Garmin Forerunner 965. You lose out a few things: the flashlight, the latest sensor, the battery life, the hardier case when it comes to comparing it to the 965. But in terms of actual day-to-day use, those are both amazing watches and at a better price than the Epix Pro. Next up on the comparison block is the Apple Watch Ultra 2, which I also wore for pretty much the entirety of my London Marathon training block to do a direct comparison with the Epix Pro. There is a video just on this comparison on the channel as well if you want to dive into more detail, but broadly it broke down as you'd expect. I'd say the Garmin Epix Pro is the better sports watch. You've got much better battery life, like 5 times the battery life pretty much at 10 days for this and about 2 days on the Apple Watch Ultra 2. Got much better training analysis. I think you've got slightly better GPS on the Garmin. The sports tracking and training analysis in general is more detailed and better, and the native maps navigation is also better on the Garmin. The Apple Watch is obviously the better smartwatch, and it does have an amazing app store that fills in a lot of gaps where I think the Garmin is better than the Apple Watch. You can fill in those gaps mostly with the Apple Watch app store. Still don't think it's really doing very well on training analysis. I know there are some pretty good apps out there like Training Today and Athletic, but I think the hardware on the Apple Watch limits those a bit with the amount of measurements you can take and things like HRV. So yeah, overall I'd say the Garmin is the better sports watch. It's a bigger watch, it's less smart, but you are going to get more impressive sports performance and much better battery life. But the Apple Watch Ultra 2 is a very good sports watch all round, and if you want to lean a bit more into the smart side of things, it will still do a great job of tracking your training, even if you're a very serious runner, and that nice design you obviously get with Apple as well. On to the next watch, which is 2 watches. It's the Garmin Fenix 7 Pro and the Garmin Enduro 2. These are pretty similar watches all round to the Epix Pro. They just don't have AMOLED screens. They have all of Garmin's top features. They have the LCD display, which means they can offer longer battery life. The Enduro 2 only comes in one size, which is the 51mm size, but you get the same range of size with the Fenix 7 Pro range and the Fenix 7 range. I personally like the AMOLED screen, so I prefer the Epix over the Fenix and the Enduro in general. Actually, the battery life, if you do get this large 51mm model Epix, you're not really taking a huge hit on battery life either. So I was saying this was usually lasting me 9 or 10 days. I just did a battery test on the Garmin Enduro 2 and it lasted me 16 days on a charge. So probably looking at about a week extra use, and the Fenix falls somewhere in the middle, but it's not a drastic drop off. Obviously, it's a much bigger drop off to the smaller sizes of the Epix Pro, but yeah, I think you now are getting to the stage a little bit where the AMOLED screen watches are starting to get that better battery life, and that makes it an easier choice, I think, to go for AMOLED. I do prefer the AMOLED screen. Like I said early on, it's just as easy to read in bright sunlight, I find, as the LCD screens, and then it's easier to read under cloud cover, tree cover, indoors. So yeah, I'd get the Epix Pro ahead of the other big Garmin watches that have LCD screens. So the Polar Grit X2 Pro is the big competitor from Polar to the Epix. It's a really nice looking watch. I actually think the design in terms of the case is a little bit nicer than the Garmin Epix Pro because it's a little bit thinner, it's very sleek, it looks really good. The AMOLED screen is really bright and vibrant on the Polar, I would say, and it has maps as well, along with multi-band GPS. That's pretty good. I think the Garmin's GPS accuracy is a little bit better than Polar's, but the Polar Grit X2 Pro is a pretty good watch all round. Just think you've got so many more features with the Garmin. I think if you look down the list of features for both watches, there are loads of stuff that Garmin has that Polar doesn't. It has much more detailed training analysis. It has smart features like music storage. It's got Climb Pro as an extra tool with its navigation features, or it's something that both watches might do, but the Garmin does it a little bit better. The maps are better on Garmin, they're routable maps, they're more detailed. GPS accuracy is a little bit better on the Garmin. Comparing the battery life of the two watches, the Grit X2 Pro was about in line with the mid-size Garmin Epix model, the 47mm model, 4 or 5 days of use. It does have quite a long battery life for an individual activity in multi-band mode, longer than you get on any of the Garmins, although do think in real-world use that the Epix Pro tended to slightly outperform its battery life estimates from Garmin, whereas the Polar tended to underperform the targets that Polar set, so it's not as big a difference as it maybe looks on paper. But yeah, the Polar Grit X2 Pro is a good watch, but at its price, which is quite high and comparable to the Epix Pro, I think the Epix Pro is a watch that just offers loads more features and does the features that both watches do a little bit better. So I'd get the Garmin Epix Pro. Next up, we've got the Suunto Race, which I think is a really competitive watch, one that I really enjoyed testing. It's got an AMOLED screen. It is priced very well. Suunto basically saw that they can't match Garmin on features, so they've undercut them on price, and it is a pretty compelling offering all round. It's got really good battery life, lasting about a week, even with a screen set to always on, using multi-band GPS. As I mentioned earlier, the multi-band GPS on Suunto watches is excellent. I think it's comparable to Garmin in accuracy, so that really puts it right up there. I had no problems with that at all. And the design of the Suunto Race, it's pretty hardy. You can get a titanium watch with a sapphire screen for a lot less than you're paying for those materials when you're looking at the Epix Pro range. So I do think the Suunto Race is a pretty compelling alternative. It nails the essentials of tracking, I'd say. It's just really nowhere near as good as Garmin and all the stuff around it. Like I say, as always, Garmin has loads more features than these watches. Some of those features you won't use, but it does have a lot more extensive training analysis. It's got the smart features. It's got the better maps and navigation features. They do get maps on the Suunto as well. So yeah, the Garmin Epix Pro is a better watch. But the Suunto Race, I think, ticks quite a few key boxes that I consider the most important stuff on watches. Things like battery life, a hardy design, good GPS accuracy. I think it's quite a nice looking watch as well. The user interface is not as good on Suunto, that's for sure, and it can be a little bit laggy at times on the Suunto Race. Now, I never experienced anything too bad in terms of lag with the Suunto Race, but I know Mike did when he was testing it. He found his watch a bit, unresponsive. It's probably something they can fix over time, I'd say. And like I say, it does nail the essentials. The Epix Pro is a better watch. I'd get the Epix Pro, and certainly if you can find it in a deal somewhere a bit closer to the Suunto Race's price. But that's a watch to look out for. If Suunto continues to update that and irons out some bugs and adds some more features, it's the essentials of a very good watch are there at a competitive price. So that's our long-term review of the Garmin Epix Pro. Let us know in the comments if there's anything else you want me to address about the watch after using it for this period. Please do like and subscribe, ring the little bell, and we'll see you next time.